Most coaches I speak to say the same thing when I ask them about speed. My athletes need to run faster. And they're not wrong, but here's the problem with that. If running faster is your target, you've got nothing to coach. You can't fix fast. You can't program fast. You can't develop fast systematically across a squad of 20 athletes with different bodies, different positions, and different movement histories. So let me give you a different lens, and this is the one that changes everything. Speed is simply producing force quickly in the right direction. To show you what I mean, look at these two athletes. This one here, the legs are churning, high cadence, looks busy, but watch every ground contact. Every step is almost directly underneath them, and they're not going anywhere fast. Now look at this one, fewer steps, but every single contact is driving the body forward into space. Same time, completely different outcome. The difference here isn't effort. It's not even fitness. It's what's happening in that moment. The foot hits the ground. How much force, how quickly, and in what direction. Push hard into the ground, do it fast, and do not hang around down there and create big leg exchanges. That drives you forward. That is acceleration. That's where you'll see most clearly, and that's what we're going to build everything from. So the question becomes, what actually influences your ability to do that? Now, most coaches know strength matters for speed, and they're right, it does. But here's where it goes wrong. The gym becomes the answer to everything. Athletes aren't getting fast, more squats, speed sessions aren't transferring, heavier deadlifts, and for a while that actually works. Because in the early stages, every kilogram of strength you add converts almost directly into speed. But then something happens. Check this out. Over time, and as that athlete progresses, we draw this curve with me. Earlier on, the progress is really steep, and as strength goes up relative to body weight, speed goes up with it. But at a certain point, that curve starts to flatten. And as we know, that roughly happens at about 1.5 times body weight for a squat. This is such an important metric to understand, because the athlete can still get stronger in the gym and still hit personal best, but out on the field, the needle isn't moving. That is known as the law of diminishing returns. So as we get through here, we've used all of our easy gains, and then what's going to happen, we actually need to put more effort in to decrease. So going from 1.5 to 2 times body weight. That is a no-go area because it's just a waste of time. And almost every coach hits it without realizing that that is happening. The problem isn't the gym work. The problem is that they never stopped to ask whether athletes actually need more strength in the first place. So here's what I need you to do instead. Before you prescribe a single gym session, assess your athlete's basic relative strength scores. Are they actually weak? Or are they already strong enough in the gym? So then it just becomes maintenance. Because once you know where they sit on that curve, everything changes. The weak ones, so as we're down here, so when we're kind of in this bracket, you can see that scope, these guys are more the weaker ones. We break these areas down. We've got maybe 3 areas. The weaker guys here, they're going to do a lot more general strength exercise because we're going to see an increase in speed. That is really important. So the gym becomes a priority, and then strong athletes need their time. So if we look in here, they need their time redistributed. If we've got the pie chart where that is going to be the gym work, then the majority is going to be your speed work, and then you've got supplementary power work in that direction as well. So what we're able to do is establish that they need less iron and more track and more sprint quality work. So we're just redistributing the training. We're not changing what they're doing. We're just reallocating it. The gym always supports speed. It was never supposed to replace it. Now, strength is only one piece of this, and the next one surprises most coaches because they're making it far more complicated than it needs to be. So if strength is one lever, technique is the next. And this is where I see coaches do the most damage without realizing it. They watch an athlete sprint and then they see 10 things wrong, and then they try to fix all 10 at once. Too much forward lean, arms crossing in the midline, heel striking, head position, and before long the athlete is deep in their own head and that they can't actually naturally run anymore. That's called cognitive overload. They then become slower, they become more robotic, they're more confused than when they even started. So here's the thing. Humans were born to run. Movement is hardwired into us. The problem is never that athletes can't sprint. It's that coaches overcomplicate the feedback until athletes stop trusting their own bodies. So let me show you what technical coaching actually needs to look like for most team sport athletes. Look at this progression of a shin angle through acceleration. At the start here, and this is a team sport acceleration, they're not down in blocks, they're in an upright standing acceleration position. So here we've got a forward lean. The shin is driving hard into the ground at a low angle. So the athlete is it pushes that way, it's going to get returned and go forward. As the athlete accelerates here at that angle, as you can see, it gradually just starts to come up into that vertical line. That's what we're looking for from a technical marker. And it's as simple as that. We're going from an angular direction pushing us in the way that we want to go to an upright position, and there we go from an acceleration to more of a maximum velocity position. So that's the technique that most of your athletes just need to understand. The detail required to improve a team sport athlete isn't found in the biomechanics textbook. It's found in selecting the right exercises and using simple, clear coaching frameworks that give athletes one thing to feel at one time. Coach less, cue better, let the right exercises do the heavy lifting. Now, technique shapes how force gets applied, but there's another quality underneath speed that most coaches are already training without knowing it. Here's one that catches almost every coach off guard. When I ask coaches how they train elasticity, most of them either go blank or they start talking about versions that they think are plyometrics, like box jumps or hurdle hops, or a separate block of jumps tacked onto the end of a session. And look, plyometrics do have their place. I'm a massive advocate of these, but the idea that elasticity is separate and a siloed quality sitting in its own training box waiting for us to do its own dedicated session is really harmful, and where coaches waste so much time and truly miss what is actually happening in the process of sprinting. Because every single time your athletes sprint, they've already been training elasticity. So let me draw this out for you. Here we have strength, power, elasticity. These are three separate training qualities, three separate things to worry about. That's how most coaches think about physical development. Now, look at this. Speed connects directly to this, because in the development of speed and using speed variations, we indirectly train and develop strength, power, and elasticity. They feed all into the same thing. So speed isn't sitting next to these qualities, it's sitting above them. It's like the umbrella that pulls them all together. And every time your athletes sprint, every time they put their foot on the ground and drive it into space, they're developing all these qualities simultaneously. The perspective shift that many coaches need to make is just because we can't see the strength number improve doesn't mean that strength isn't improving. The specificity of strength is improving, and I've got evidence in cases where we barely did any gym strength work but achieved lifetime best in the gym when we did more explosive speed work. So stop thinking about elasticity as something you need to find extra time for. Start thinking about speed work as the training stimulus that develops it along with everything else underneath this umbrella. That changes how you program, it changes how you prioritize, and it changes how you think about what a speed session actually is doing for your athletes. Now, Here's where it gets counterintuitive, because the next quality is all about slowing down to get faster. So if elasticity is already being trained every time your athletes sprint, you'd think the answer is simple. Just sprint more, sprint harder, go maximum every session, and that's exactly what most coaches do. Every speed session is flat out, every rep is chased, every athlete is being pushed to their absolute limit, because that is what speed training looks like, right? Well, here's the problem with that. Maximum effort creates maximum tension, and maximum tension is the enemy of coordination. Think about what happens to an athlete when they're under threat, when they're being chased, when the pressure is on, when everything is maximal. Their body tightens, their movement becomes rigid, their nervous system is in survival mode and not learning mode. And you cannot build new movement patterns in survival mode. You can only repeat the ones that are already there. So let me show you how elite coaches actually think about sprint intensity. So there are 3 bands, and this is taken from foundational research on maximum force and strength production within powerlifting. What we have here on this right hand side is our absolute max. And this is the hardest, most involuntary thing that we can do. And this is what's called our competition max here, the next, which is going to be below that, okay? That is what you would typically see in the period of competition. And lastly, what we actually have, which is not our most demanding and most high output, which we would see in competition, is what's known as our training max. And then what we have here, adjacent to that, is our speed, what we'll call a speed deficit. Okay, so the absolute max is if everything's right and we can do it and it's a one-off. We're looking to use our training max to peak towards our competition max, which would be on our competition days or our weekend when we're our most freshness. But we can't, with our speed deficit, we have to establish a new maximum to be able to repeatedly develop and load speed, which makes this deliberate, controlled and specific. This is where coordination is actually built. You're still running fast, but you're not running so fast that your body's threat mechanism takes over. And most coaches only ever work in these top bands. They try to push everything as fast as possible to develop what we've been told as the neural patterns. But what happens? We don't groove and develop the neural patterns when we're under threat. The mechanics don't become smooth, the mechanics are less efficient, and the sprint quality actually is declining. We need to do the opposite to optimize these 3 bands, because in order to do so and develop speed, we need to let the brain and body recognize the incremental increases of speed. So that is why you need to stop defaulting to maximum speed every session. Use variations of speed deliberately across these 3 bands, and you'll develop coordination that maximum effort sprint work alone will never, ever give you. The final piece is one that almost no coach measures correctly, and it's costing their athletes real developmental time every single week. But for now, we've covered force production, strength, technique, elasticity, coordination. And now the one thing that ties all of that together is exposure. How much actual speed work are your athletes getting? And I bet for most coaches watching this, the honest answer is less than you think. Most coaches calculate sprint volume in the same way. And we found this, and I found this a lot when I was looking in the sports science department in professional rugby. We would look at total distance covered in a whole session. And for example, within our speed zone, let's say there was a 2,000 meters covered in a 30-minute rugby session, and then 800 meters of that were in what's known as typically a sprint zone. Okay, and then you think, right, brilliant, they've gone and done 800 meters of sprint work, job done. But here's the problem with that. Not all of those meters are equal. Your warm-up strides or your build-ups or your easy accelerations getting into the session, they're all getting counted towards this. And that's like counting your warm-up sets towards your working volume. Nobody does that. Look at this in a sprint, in a run-up. Okay, so that's the ground, we call that 50 meters, and you've got your speed, you're gradually going to increase your speed over there, where actually this is the meaningful distance when we're up to 80 or 90% of our speed. These 1, 2, 3, 4 steps are the most important, where these don't actually attribute to the volume. And that is why we need to understand exposure. So here's a number that stops most coaches in their tracks. A typical max speed session might cover 200 meters of what looks like sprint work. But when you strip out everything that isn't genuine maximum intensity, like we just talked about here, you're left with only about 20 actual quality steps, and that's 20 steps of real speed work in the entire session, and I call that step load. And when coaches start seeing it in that way, two things happen. First, they realize their athletes are getting far less real sprint exposure than they thought, and second, they stop panicking about volume and start getting precise about the quality. The metric that actually matters is step load, the actual quality steps your athletes take at genuine sprint intensities. Measure that deliberately every session and build your exposure from there. So let's bring all of this together, because everything we've covered today connects back to the one definition we started with. Speed isn't about running fast. It never was. Speed is producing force quickly in the right direction, and everything we've talked about, strength, technique, elasticity, coordination, exposure, all 5 of them are just different ways of developing your ability to do exactly that. And here's what I want you to take away from this. You don't need to be doing more. You don't need to be doing bigger sessions, more drills, more gym work. What you need is a clearer picture of what speed actually is and what piece of those 5 levers is actually limiting your athletes right now. That's where this series goes next. Knowing what speed is gets you started, but knowing why some athletes are faster than others and what you can actually do about it is where the real coaching begins. So in the next video, I'm going to look exactly at that. Why are some athletes faster than others, and how much of it can you actually change? Because the answer might surprise you. See you on the next video.